Yo, what's up guys, Alf here, and today I'm going to be doing a full in-depth deck breakdown of a deck that I've recently used to hit rank 8 with on the arena ladder. As you can see from the screenshot here, I'm currently 61-6 with this list, so it's been performing incredibly well for me so far, and I'm also in the middle of writing a full in-depth deck guide article about this for MTGAzone Premium that will have a bunch more details, a full sideboard guide, how I change the deck for best of one, and some tips and tricks to help you play the deck as well. So if you're a premium member, keep your eye out for that. I'll have a link to that down in the description once it goes live, and there'll also be a link down in the description for the importable deck list if you want to try it out for yourself as well. But anyway, with that all out of the way, this is my Izzet Slickshot Cruise Wizards deck in Historic. So obviously Izzet Wizards has been arguably the best deck in the format for quite a while now, but we got a couple of really interesting additions from Outlaws of Thunder Junction in Slickshot Show Off and Prismatic Vista that I think can really change the way the deck is built. So I wanted to pick it up again, innovate on it, and see if we can come up with a better build than the stock version. So the main card I want to talk about here is Slickshot Show Off. This card is incredibly strong. So 2 mana 1/2 flying haste. It's a wizard itself, which is kind of a prerequisite for a creature to be running this deck because we really need to consistently be able to enable both modes on Flame of Anor and Wizard's Lightning. So being a wizard, obviously absolutely huge here. Flying and haste is really big, and then getting a buff of +2/+0 for every instant or sorcery or non-creature, so it also triggers off stuff like Pithing Needle in the sideboard, is absolutely huge. This can apply a ton of pressure out of nowhere and really fits with what the wizard's game plan wants to be doing. Additionally, the plot ability is so strong in this as well because it enables you to play around interaction way more easily. I think the biggest weakness of the traditional Izzet Wizard shell is that you are weak to decks that have a bunch of cheap interaction, like the black mid-range decks and control. And so if you are against those decks and you are worried the opponent has a removal spell, you can just plot this, pay your mana up front, and then just leave it plotted. This particular variant of wizards, compared to the most regular ones, is much better at grinding into longer games. So if you are against an interactive heavy deck like midrange or control, you can just leave this plotted, and it basically forces the opponent to keep holding mana up every single turn in order to kill the show off when you eventually do play it. So that alone taxes your opponent's removal against those sorts of decks. And then additionally, it's also really big because it guarantees a wizard in play on turn 3 for Flame of Anor and Wizard's Lightning, which is particularly powerful with Flame of Anor because getting both modes on this, especially early on in the game, is such a swing in tempo. And the biggest weakness of this, right, is you have to play your creatures on turn 1 or 2 in order to enable this on turn 3. And like I said, if the opponent has a removal spell, they can just kill your wizards to stop you from using both modes. But with Slickshot Show Off, you can just plot this on turn 2, and then if you have your third land, you can just immediately play this, and then straight away trigger both modes on Flame of Anor, and there's nothing the opponent can do to stop that unless they have a counter spell. So Slickshot Show Off feels like such a powerful addition to the deck. Now, if you wanted to just slot Show Off into regular Izzet Wizards, I think you can just cut Balmor and run this instead. I do think Show Off is just a better card than Balmor, but I think Show Off should change the way that Izzet Wizards is built going forwards because I feel like it really replaces Reckless Charge as an effect. So Reckless Charge was really important in previous versions of Izzet Wizards because none of your creatures had haste, so it was a really good way to enable you to force through a bunch of damage out of nowhere, and then obviously works very well alongside Dreadful Arcanist. But Show Off having haste itself kind of means you get that effect without needing to have a creature plus the Reckless Charge, because one of my big gripes with Reckless Charge was that it was a super polarizing card that was really strong against decks that didn't have interaction, but if the opponent had a removal spell for the creature you're using the charge on, that was such a blowout and you started to fall behind really quickly. So Slickshot Show Off gives you access to the same sort of pressure out of nowhere that Reckless Charge gave you without making you super vulnerable to interaction because, like I said, you can plot it. And additionally, I don't think Show Off works particularly well alongside Reckless Charge, because if Show Off is your only creature and you have the Reckless Charge, sure, you get the +3/+0, but you don't get the haste because Slickshot Show Off already has haste, so you're losing half the power of the card in that scenario. So I'm actually pretty happy to cut Reckless Charge. It's one of the cards that I've always wanted to cut from the deck, but it felt necessary because it makes you so weak to interactive decks. So cutting Reckless Charge because Show Off provides you the same sort of effect makes you much less vulnerable to the interactive decks, which is a really big deal. The other downside of cutting Reckless Charge from the deck is it does make Dreadful Arcanist a lot worse because giving Arcanist haste is huge to enable you to trigger at the same turn, and giving it +3/+0 enables you to flashback stuff like Flame of Anor immediately, which is a really good way to clear the way for the opponent to start attacking again. However, the big issue with Arcanist again is that Arcanist is only good if you can keep the opponent off the board, right? If you're in a matchup, especially against a deck like Mono Green Devotion, where they can land a really big green creature, if you don't have access to a Flame of Anor, it's really easy for the Arcanist to just get stonewalled and not be able to attack. So again, that wasn't an issue in a lot of scenarios, but it's another card that does feel a little bit polarizing to me. So I feel like cutting Arcanist for Snapcaster Mage, that I'll talk about a little bit later, and cutting Reckless Charge because Show Off does a very similar thing, enables you to play a style of deck that still has access to speed because of Show Off and all of your other usual wizard stuff, but enables you to grind into longer games a lot easier, which is where I'm coming on to Treasure Cruise and Prismatic Vistas. So Treasure Cruise is a card that I never really felt fit very well into stock versions of Izzet Wizards for three main reasons. So first of all, I think Flame of Anora and Iteration are just better cards at enabling you to grind into longer games because they come online early. Obviously, Flame of Anora is potentially just the best card in the deck as well. And then past that, you needed to have a very high density of 1-mana instants and sorceries to consistently enable Dreadhorde Arcanist. So there just wasn't room for Treasure Cruise in the deck for that reason. Second of all, it was also more difficult to get this online quickly compared to a deck like Izzet Phoenix because you don't fill the graveyard as quickly. And then thirdly, I feel like while stock versions of Izzet Wizards in the past do have ways to grind into longer games like Expressive Iteration and Flame of Anora, those particular builds weren't very interested in grinding into longer games. They were much more focused on speed and trying to close the game out quickly. Whereas with this particular build, I feel like all three of those reasons are kind of flipped on their head, right? We're not running Dreadhorde Arcanist at all, so we don't need to run as many 1-mana instants and sorceries. Obviously, we run some so that we can enable, our prowess triggers and stuff like Symmetry Sage early in the game, but that's not really a big reason anymore. Secondly, in terms of filling the graveyard, we now have Prismatic Vista. So this was the second card we got from Outlaws of Thunder Junction that made me rethink how the deck should be built. So Prismatic Vista, very low opportunity cost to running this in the mana base. I mean, you could potentially run some extra utility lands like Den of the Bugbear in its place instead, but Prismatic Vista does enable you to run Treasure Cruise more consistently because just cracking this into the graveyard fills your graveyard a lot more quickly. You're obviously going to be getting stuff like your cheap instants and sorceries in the graveyard to enable Cruise early on as well. So enabling this early on is much more easy with Prismatic Vista. And then thirdly, being able to grind into longer games isn't something that previous versions of Izzet Wizards was interested in, mainly because of how that deck was built. I feel like the decks reliant on Reckless Charge meant that you had a lot of slots taken up for the aggressive side of the deck. Now with Slickshot Show Off basically taking up just 4 slots to give you that speed still, you can afford to run more cards that enable you to grind into longer games. And the reason I'm interested in that is I just want to quickly talk about Izzet Wizards' position in the metagame and why I think a more resilient build makes the deck much better positioned. So traditionally, Izzet Wizards has been at its best against the less interactive decks like Mono Green Devotion and Yawgmoth, and then at its weakest against the decks that pack in cheap interaction like the black mid-range decks and Control, for example. So running a list like this that has 4 Expressive Iteration, 4 Flame of Anora, 3 Treasure Cruise, and 3 Snapcaster Mage, this completely flips the interactive matchups on their head. Now you can grind into longer games way more effectively, to the point where every time I faced a black mid-range deck or a Control deck, I felt favoured even game 1, which is a really big deal. So this version of the deck definitely feel like it flips Wizards' bad matchups on its head. And then in terms of the good matchups, against the creature-based combo decks like Yawgmoth and Samwise and Kethis, for example, yes, the speed of the deck does matter because that is one way that you can race those decks, but I feel like the main reason that you're good in that matchup is that you pair that pressure with a lot of cheap interaction, right? You have a lot of ways to kill the opponent's creatures, like Play with Fire, Flame of Anora, and Wizard's Lightning, and then if you look in the sideboard, we've got 4 Shoversides as well. I feel like the main reason those matchups are good is because you pair these ways to apply pressure, like the Show Off and the Symmetry Sage, with ways to keep the opponent off their combos. So the creature-based combo decks also feel like consistently good matchups to me as well. So all of those good matchups remain the same, potentially even become better because you can use Snapcaster Mage to flash back your cheap interaction to double up on your removal spells to guarantee that you keep the opponent off the combo. And then the other matchups like the Mono Green Devotion and, other matchups like maybe Enchantress, where being a tempo deck and applying pressure is really important. You are slightly weaker in those sorts of matchups compared to the stock versions, but those matchups, especially Mono Green Devotion, were already your best matchups anyway, so you're still very favoured in them. And in those sorts of matchups, I just bored out of Treasure Cruise anyway and bored into cards like Aether Gust and Spell Pierce to enable you to apply pressure. So I feel like running a build of Wizards like this makes your bad matchups much better, makes your good matchups against the creature-based combo decks still as good, if not better, and then you're slightly weaker against the Mono Green Devotion and, decks like that game 1, but those were already some of your best matchups anyway. So I feel like this version of Wizards really helps to shore up the matchup spread and has felt really strong across the board, which is pretty scary considering Wizards was already one of the best decks in the format. So next up, I'm just going to quickly go over the other individual cards in the deck and the sideboard as well. So Symmetry Sage, obviously just one of the most powerful and fast cards in the deck as well, enables you to apply a bunch of pressure and also works very nicely alongside Slickshot Show Off because it only has 1 power, so we can buff its power by +2/+0 if we have both of these and a couple of instants and sorceries. Then we've got Soulscar Mage, which is probably the weakest creature in the deck, but we really need a high density of 1-drop creatures, and this is the next best option. And the ability to shrink the opponent's creatures is very relevant against decks that are running bigger creatures, especially against Mono Green Devotion. Being able to shrink stuff like Cavalier of Thorns and Polukranos in combat is very big as well. Then we got Consider, which is obviously just a generically good cantrip, but works very effectively with Treasure Cruise as well, because if we basically guarantee that we flip over the card on top, that's 2 cards immediately in the graveyard for the Delve on Treasure Cruise, which is really nice, as well as just fueling all of your other cards. Obviously, having 1 mana instants and sorceries is very relevant for Snapcaster Mage as well, because then we can just cast it on turn 3 and guarantee something to flash back. Similarly, Play with Fire just works as cheap interaction, but is also very importantly can go face as well, which is really nice at giving you reach and closing games out. I much prefer Play with Fire in the main deck because of that over something like Sheverside. And then the ability to scry when we go face as well is very relevant for extra card selection. And then same thing works very nicely with Snapcaster Mage to enable us to cast it on turn 3. Speaking of which, Snapcaster Mage is the other main change that I'm making to this deck, because I felt like Dreadhorde Arcanist wasn't really worth running without Reckless Charge. And like I said, this just enables you to grind against the slower, more interactive decks as well, whilst also helping you kill creatures more consistently as well, especially with Wizard's Lightning, Flame of Anor, and Play with Fire. Having this as a guaranteed way to kill your opponent's creatures, Arcanist was a little bit less consistent because you needed Reckless Charge in order to do that, whereas Snapcaster Mage was much easier to do, especially against the decks running counter spells as well. So Snapcaster Mage, just really nice tool at enabling you to double up your interaction and grind into longer games as well. And Expressive Iteration, just really, really consistent way to grind into longer games, helps you find what you need, is a good trigger for your Prowess cards and Symmetry Sage as well. I'm sure if you played with Wizards, you know how strong this card is. And then similarly, Flame of Anor, just probably the best card in the entire deck. So powerful. And like I said, with the ability to plot Slickshot Show Off, we can very consistently get both modes on turn 3, which is really huge. Then Wizards Lightning, again, if you play with the deck, you know how strong this card is. We have a very high number of Wizards to be able to consistently lower the cost on this to 1, and then it's basically just Lightning Bolt. Again, alongside Play with Fire, gives us good reach, which just enables us to close games out, even if the opponent does keep off the board. Already gone over Treasure Cruise as well. Then we've got Gigantha as the companion, which, I've seen some people say in the past that you shouldn't run this in Wizards because it gives away what deck you're on, but I think that's nonsense. The power of having Gigantha in your companion zone has come up so many times and has won me a lot of games in grindier matchups, which, like I said, does represent a big portion of the meta game. So I think it's absolutely worth running Gigantha. And additionally, if people are, still playing against the stock versions of Wizards, they might think, okay, I'm against Izzet Wizards, I'm going to mold to more interaction. Well, this particular version of the deck doesn't really care about that, because you can so easily grind into longer games off the back of Expressive Iteration, Treasure Cruise, and Flame of Anor. So I think the arguments for not running Gigantha and Wizards become much less of an issue with this particular build as well. Then in terms of the mana base, we are running slightly more lands than usual Wizards builds. We're running 22, and the main reason for that is just because we do sometimes want to grind into longer games. Hitting our third land on curve is very important because we're running Snapcaster Mage in the main deck, and obviously Flame of Anor is really important as well. So I feel like 22 lands is really important. I started off with 20, very quickly moved up to 21, and then up to 22. In terms of the lands themselves, we've obviously got Prismatic Vista, and I have got 5 basics in order to enable it. I started off with 4, but like I said, we do grind into longer games, and getting to a point where we have a Prismatic Vista, but we're completely out of basics, did come up with 4. So I like running 5 here just to ensure that we consistently have enough basics to crack with the Prismatic Vista. Then we've obviously got the good blue-red dual lands like Steam Vents and Spybluff Canal. Fiery Islet is a card that I was running 4 of initially, but starts where you have multiples of these are so painful. You'll just kill yourselves a lot of the time off the back of Fiery Islet. So 2 has felt like the sweet spot for me. I also tried builds with 3, but I feel like it just adds up way too much. So 2 has definitely felt like the sweet spot. Then we've got 1 Otawara, which is probably the best monocolored utility land that we can get. Just gives you interaction, gives you a way to answer locks as well. I have faced the Enchantress deck a few times, and having a card in your main deck that you can dig for off your Expressive Iterations and Treasure Cruises in order to bounce Phyrexian Unlife so that you can just kill the opponent once they're at a negative life total is really big, and obviously is just useful outside of that in other matchups as well. Then we've got Riverglide Pathway, which is just the next best dual coloured land. I think you could obviously run Shivan Reef instead, but like I said with the Fiery Islet, the damage really adds up, and we don't have many ways to gain life. So I've liked the Riverglide Pathway, and unlike a deck like Izzet Phoenix where you have a ton of 1 mana instants and sorceries, it doesn't really matter that we have a lot of lands that can only produce one colour or the other, if that makes sense, because a lot of the cards don't require very specific mana restrictions, right? In a deck like Izzet Phoenix where you sometimes need to go blue spell, red spell, you need to have very specific mana. In this deck, it's not really as much of a consideration, so the mana basis felt fine to me. Again, running Prismatic Vista does mean that we don't have as much room for cards like Den of the Bugbear, for example, but enabling Treasure Cruise just feels way more important to me. So next up we'll have a look at the sideboard, starting off here with 2 copies of Spell Pierce, which is obviously very important against control, but also very nice against any non-creature combo decks, decks like Belcher and Creativity, and, I've faced Enchantress recently where Spell Pierce is really clutch there as well. So Spell Pierce, very flexible sideboard card against decks that rely on non-creatures. Then we've got 4 copies of Shovaside, which is just really nice as extra interaction, and is very important against the Izzet Wizard's Mirror Match, which is something I didn't talk about with the main deck. This particular version of the deck is way better in the Mirror Match than just the stock versions, because Izzet Wizard's Mirrors typically come down to who can keep the opponent's creatures off the board and grind them into the longer game, and our version of the deck is so much better at doing that because we have Snapcaster Mage as a way to double up on our removal spells to keep the opponent's creatures off the board. And then when it is this super, grindy attrition-based matchup, having 3 Treasure Cruise alongside your Iteration and Flame of Nor means that you're way more likely to pull ahead. So I feel like this particular version of the deck, especially with 4 copies of Shovaside in the sideboard, is way favoured in the Wizards Mirror Match. I think I've only lost the Mirror Match one time and won every other time I faced it. So Shovaside, really important part there. And then it's also just very important against any other creature deck. Any other deck where you want a bit of extra cheap interaction, it's very important. As we can see, we've also got Brotherhood's End in the sideboard, but that's predominantly here for artifact decks and very go wide decks like Boros Convoke, for example. So if you're up against a deck like Samwise or Kethis or Yawgmoth, Shovaside is really nice to bring in there as well. Then we've got 2 copies of Surgical Extraction, so this is another card from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and this is definitely my graveyard hate of choice in this deck. First of all, because it's essentially a free instant, which obviously works very well with all of our prowess creatures, but it's also just way more effective against the graveyard decks that you're worried about with Izzet Wizards. So that's stuff like Kethis, where you can just exile their Kethis or their Moxambas from the graveyard or their Jaces in certain scenarios and just completely shut them off comboing off in a lot of scenarios, which is really big. You don't need to hold open mana for it. You can't, you don't need to preemptively cast it like you do with something like an Unlicensed Hearse or whatever. You can just hold it into your hand for the right spot, which is really big. Then against decks like Reanimator, this is huge at getting rid of their Reanimator stuff. Against a deck like Phoenix, this is absolutely huge as well because you can just extract their Phoenixes out of nowhere. So this definitely feels like the graveyard hate of choice, unless a deck like Dredge suddenly becomes more popular. But Surgical, not only nice because it's just particularly good against the graveyard decks that Wizards is usually worried about, but it also triggers all of your prowess creatures for 0 mana, which is very decent. I've used this to buff my Slickshot show off to kill the opponent in certain spots as well. Then we've got 2 copies of Pithing Needle, which is a really useful card against especially decks like Yawgmoth and Samwise to keep them off the combo, but you can also bring this in against Belcher. You can also bring this in against Charbelcher decks as well. So Pithing Needle, really useful card against decks that rely on activated abilities. Then we got 2 copies of Aether Gust, which is predominantly here for mono green Devotion. I really wanted a card to improve the Devotion matchup. Like I said, I still think it's good game. I still think it's good matchup in general, even though our main deck is slightly worse positioned because we don't close games out as quickly as the traditional versions of Izzet Wizards do. But post-sideboard, having access to Aether Gust is basically just a catch-all answer to anything they play early on, whether that's an Old Growth Troll, a Pelucranos, a Kiora, and also, once you're in a commanding position, using this to stop any of their stuff on the stack is really huge as well. So Aether Gust, really strong against mono green Devotion, and then, if you are against a red or green deck, like the Cabaretti Revels Goblins deck as well, you can consider bringing this in there as well. And then 2 copies of Brotherhood's End. Like I said, this is here for very specific matchups. Don't bring this in against creature decks unless they're incredibly go wide, like a Boros Convoke deck, for example. But honestly, the main reason this is here is for the artifact-based decks. I have seen an increase in the kind of blue-white retrofit Foundry-style decks. I've also seen an increase in decks like Hammer Time as well, where Brotherhood's End can be really nice. The obvious big downside of this card is if you use this to kill creatures, it does kill all of your own creatures. So that's the main reason why I only bring this in against creature decks that are going incredibly wide, like something like, Boros Convoke, like I've said. And you do lose Gigantha as well, so there is definitely a cost there. But this is here predominantly for artifact decks. So that's the deck overall. Like I said, I'm really happy with this build. I think the mirror improves a lot. I think it improves all of your bad matchups significantly, while still retaining all of your good matchups. I still feel like you're really good against the creature-based combo decks. You're still decent against Devotion as well. And I feel like the only way I would want to switch back to a build that was running Reckless Charge and just maximizing speed is if a deck that goes bigger than you, where you are really reliant on your fast tempo roll, like Enchantress, for example, becomes very popular. But outside of that, I'm really happy with this build, and it's been a ton of fun to play as well. I haven't played Izzet Wizards in a very long time, and I forgot how fun this deck can be to play. So that's the deck. If you've got any questions about it at all, definitely let me know in the comments. Next up, I've got 5 games that I was playing on the ladder so you guys can see it in action. Either way, hope you enjoyed the deck guide, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Big up. Okay, so we're going second tier against the Gigantha deck. Can't keep that because it's a no-lander, obviously. This I do think we keep, and I think against Gigantha it's most likely going to be the mirror match, so I want to keep 2 lands, Iteration, and at least one of these Soulscar Mages, and I think in the mirror match I'd rather keep 2 Wizard's Lightning just as interaction to keep the opponent off the board, so I think I'm going to put back a Soulscar Mage here, but it's pretty close. It's also kind of annoying that we only have 1 red source, because I'd love to be able to play Soulscar Mage and Lightning in the same turn, because obviously if the Soulscar Mage dies here, we have no other way to reduce the Wizard's Lightning down to 1 mana. Play with fire off the top is huge. We get to take their Soulscar Mage off the board straight away, which is really nice, and I'd love to see a red land off the top, because then if they cast something like a Dreadhorde Arcanist here, or, you know, any creature really, we can go Soulscar Mage into Wizard's Lightning. Okay, they do have the Arcanist, love a red source. Okay, perfect. So now we can just jam the Soulscar Mage, and we're going to jam the Wizard's Lightning here, because if we wait until their turn, they can obviously fire off Flame of Anor and get both modes, so definitely want to take out the Arcanist before they can do that. So we'll see what the opponent's got here. Obviously, we've got Wizard's Lightning here in case they play another creature, which is pretty huge. Okay, so they lead on a Consider, so maybe digging for a creature if I had to guess. Okay, and they plot a show-off. So here... I'm going to play a land out. Maybe that's incorrect, though. Maybe I'm supposed to go for an Expressive Iteration. But I feel like I like playing the land out here because if we miss a land off the Iteration, we can't hold up Wizard's Lightning. And here we've got Snapcaster Mage available as well. Okay, so opponent did burn our mana there, which was decent play from them, I think. Here, I think I am going to lead on the Iteration because now even if we do miss a land... Oh, wow, which we do. That's pretty unfortunate. We still have mana open for Wizard's Lightning, which is pretty nice. If they do kill the Soulscar Mage here, though, that's going to be kind of rough because then we won't have the Wizard's Lightning up. And obviously, we don't have Snapcaster Mage open now either. So here, I think I'm going to get Treasure Cruise. I just want to, you know, we've got Burn Spell, we've got Snapcast, we've got creatures. So I think I want to just keep, getting ways to pull ahead in terms of advantage. Because this is, I think, the mirror match is a pretty grindy matchup. And here, we are wasting the Wizard's Lightning. There is definitely a temptation to just fire it off there for additional damage and get an extra card in the graveyard, but I really want to have a removal spell for this show-off at all times, because especially if they have Reckless Charge, which they most likely, if they're on like a conventional build, they most likely will have that game 1. I really don't want them to let them get value off it, if that makes sense. So I am glad that I held up the Wizard's Lightning there. Them getting the card advantage off Flame of Anor is pretty big, though. That's a really big advantage in this matchup. So we've got 5 cards in the yard. We could go for Treasure Cruise here. I kind of want to hold open Snapcaster Mage, but the awkward thing here is if they play a 3 toughness creature and we have to get Wizard's Lightning, they can kill the Snapcaster Mage in response. So I think I'm just going to plot the show off here and hold open mana, because the opponent is playing quite conservatively, right, which makes me hope they're not just going to jam creatures out, because I'd like to be able to take, a turn off here from holding open removal. So they just jammed the Gigantha, so I'd really like to find a Flame of Anor if possible. Like a Fetch Land would also enable us to Treasure Cruise and still have mana available here, which would be pretty nice. But Flame of Anor would obviously be the best draw here. Outside of that, we do have Snapcaster Mage as a potential, we could go Snapcaster Iteration. But again, I think the key here, especially game 1, is that I just want to try and punish Reckless Charge as much as I can. Although having said that, if they had Reckless Charge here, I think they use it on the Gigantha, because there's nothing they can really use to punish that. So here, I'm going to lead on the show off. The only reason, there is maybe an argument to go and consider first in case we hit exactly Flame of Anor, because then they could kill the show off in response to the consider and we wouldn't get both modes on it, but that seems pretty greedy to me. And I think most likely we're going to be bidding the card we find on top unless it's Flame of Anor and then going for Treasure Cruise here, which would be pretty sick. Okay, so they crack a Vista, so this is presumably going to be a removal spell for the show-off. No, it's not. Okay, so we bin a card, gets an extra card in the graveyard for Treasure Cruise. Oh, we find Flame of Anor, and they didn't kill the show-off. That's huge. So now we get to kill the Gigantha. They cracked for a Mountain, so we don't have to play around Spell Pierce either, which is massive. And then we can get in for 5 here. I presume they would have... Yeah, if they had a removal spell, they would have killed the show-off before... Well, in response to the Consider. So now I feel like we're in a pretty good spot. Obviously, the shields are down now, so they could use Reckless Charge. And they have been playing quite slowly, so there is a chance they're just holding on to it. Oh, wow, they have another Flame of Anor. That is definitely the key card in the mirror match. If you can get off your Flame of Anors with multiple modes, you're in a really good spot. Okay, so they do have multiple creatures, which is a little scary. We do have Snapcaster Mage, thankfully, which we can use to kill one of them. And there is the Reckless Charge. So, unfortunately, they did get value off it, but... you know, I think we had to go shields down to use Flame of Anor. And again here, I think we have to do the same thing again. Snapcaster Mage, Flame of Anor, take out the Symmetry Sage. We are down to 10, which is a little bit worrying. Okay, interesting. So we could crack a fetch and go for Treasure Cruise here, or we can try and bluff Interaction. I think bluffing Interaction here may be better, especially when they have the Reckless Charge, but, you know, from my opponent's point of view, I don't know. I think I'm just going to go for the Treasure Cruise. I mean, I've kind of forced myself into it now because I've already cracked for an island, but I don't know. I feel like I'm probably safe here. And the extra mana that we can have access to next turn is pretty big. So yeah, maybe there's an argument. Oh, okay, they do have the show off. So, I mean, especially with a wizard in play, there's probably a decent argument for maybe holding open a mana here just to stop them using the Reckless Charge. Okay, I think we would have been dead either way, right? Okay, so that's kind of unfortunate. Don't think there's much we could have done there. I'm definitely going to rewatch this back, though, because that maybe feels like a game where I could have done things slightly differently, but I think post-sideboard, we're definitely going to have the advantage. I mean, in general, I think we have the advantage game one, right? If they don't kill us that turn, I think if we get to untap with all that interaction, we're probably favourites to win that game. But I feel like the way that game played out, we had to kind of go shields down there. But post-sideboard, I feel because we've got 4 Iteration, 4 Flame of Anor, 3 Treasure Cruise, we can afford to cut Consider and still have enough card advantage. And we just want to max out as much removal as possible. Shove Aside is so solid in this matchup, especially when you're on the draw. Just to keep your opponent's creatures off the battlefield, because that's the key thing. I think especially post-sideboard, the Wizard's Mirror, it's almost always going to be correct for the Reckless Charge builds to board out of that, because it makes you so vulnerable to interaction, which is going to be more common after sideboard. And so the key here, I think, is just keeping the opponent off the board, and then in these grindy, attrition-based, mirror matches, having access to 4 Iteration, 4 Flame of Anor, and 4 Snapcaster Mage definitely gives you an edge, I think. So here, I think the name of the game is just keeping the opponent off the board. I'm not going to preemptively fire off this Wizard's Lightning here. I'm going to save it, because we do miss out on 3 damage here, which, isn't nothing, but I feel like post-sideboard especially, these matchups aren't about racing. I'm going to attack with the Symmetry Sage here just in case we can bait them to use a removal spell now. It gives us a bit more information. And, there's no way we can get punished for attacking with the Symmetry Sage here, because if they go creature into Reckless Charge, we can just Wizard's Lightning it. Or if they just cast the show off, we can Wizard's Lightning it as well. So here we are in kind of an awkward spot where if we miss our 3rd land, we don't have anything great to do next turn, especially if they don't play a creature. Okay, they just run out Balmor, so I'm definitely going to preemptively use the Wizard's Lightning when we, are choked on mana a little bit here. There is maybe an argument to wait until our turn so we can get the triggers, and potentially we could get Flame of Anor off if we draw the 3rd land, but I think being stuck on 2 lands, it's more important to use our mana efficiently. Here, since we drew another Wizard's Lightning, I am actually happy to go main phase, because then we are getting in for a decent amount of damage, and we still have Wizard's Lightning here available in case they do play another creature or go creature into Reckless Charge if they have capped that in. But yeah, maybe last turn I could also see an argument to waiting to play the Wizard's Lightning, because if we draw a land, Flame of Anor would be slightly better. And if we don't, we can then attack without having to burn another Wizard's Lightning. So maybe that was a slight misplay on my part. Maybe I'm supposed to not use the Wizard's Lightning during their turn and wait until mine. But, I felt like being stuck on 2 lands, it's probably slightly better to use our mana a little bit more efficiently there. Could be wrong, though. So missing the 3rd land drop again is a little bit rough, but we're definitely winning the race here, and I feel like we should be winning the long game as well, because we are filling up our graveyard. Even if we do keep missing land drops here, we can potentially Treasure Cruise, which should help us find the 3rd land. And we've obviously got the Wizard's Lightning ready here to kill any creature the opponent might play. So as long as we find this 3rd land at some point soon, I think we'll be good. Okay, there's Dreadhorde Arcanist. So we do need to be wary of Spell Pierce here. But, I mean, if we go Wizard's Lightning and they Spell Pierce it, if we untap and find that 3rd land, which I think we're likely to relatively soon, right? We've missed it for quite a few turns. Wow, they kept in the Reckless Charge, so they're going to get punished pretty hard for it here. Unless they have Spell Pierce. If they have Spell Pierce here, that's going to be kind of rough. But even if they do, I don't believe they can kill both of our creatures in the same turn. So if we do find that 3rd land, we can really punish them with a Flame of Anor. So opponent definitely has something here. I feel like if they had a Spell Pierce, they would definitely just snap it off straight away. So probably got something else here instead. Maybe a Wizard's Lightning, perhaps. You know, that would probably be the card that they would have to tank about the most here. Because if the Arcanist dies, then they can't cast it. So opponent's still in the tank here. Either that or they've disconnected. So only 3 cards in the yard yet, so we're not super close. I guess 4 cards once this Wizard's Lightning resolves. So we are getting close to be able to casting the Treasure Cruise, but finding the 3rd land here is going to be super important. You know, this is one of the main reasons why I wanted to run a slightly higher land count in this version anyway, because we do want to be grinding into the long game in certain scenarios, and we really want to find the 3rd land, not only for Flame of an Orb, but also so we can go Snapcaster Mage, flash back a 1-drop like Consider or Play with Fire. Okay, we did find the 3rd land finally, which is huge, so just going to hold open this Flame of an Orb in case they play another creature, especially with this Reckless Charge in the graveyard. We want to hold open removal here if we can. So opponent plays a land here. It would be a little bit annoying if they don't play a creature this turn, because I feel like with this Treasure Cruise in hand, we're pretty incentivized to just Flame of an Orb to draw 2 anyway. We would really love to get the removal spell off. Wow, they just scoop it up. So going into game 3, I'm pretty happy with how we sideboarded, right? We've got a ton of early interaction here, which is just the most important thing. Keep the opponent off the board, forces them to play a longer game, and then we typically win the longer games because we have, you know, like I said, 4 iteration, 4 flame, 3 cruise, 3 snapcaster. Just gives us so much more, or so many ways to pull ahead in terms of card advantage. And also being on the draw here is a very real upside with Shoverside. Shoverside being instant speed is absolutely huge in this matchup, so okay, opponent is here. They used the full 2 minutes to sideboard, so I'm probably going to edit out that so you don't have to sit through it all. But yeah, going into game 3, feel pretty confident. I do feel like this build definitely gives you a pretty big edge against the more stock versions, especially with Shoverside being instant speed here on the draw. I'm actually pretty happy if the opponent keeps in Reckless Charge against me, because it's so much easier to punish when we got Shoverside in the deck. So no creatures, but I'm actually pretty happy to keep this hand. Right, we've got 3 pieces of removal here. Shoverside is just a guaranteed answer to basically anything they can play here as well. And then we've obviously got Flame of an Orb and Treasure Cruise to start pulling ahead. I actually don't mind keeping hands with no creatures at all in the mirror, because like we saw last game, you really want to save your burn spells to kill the opponent's creatures. And if the opponent has quite a burn spell heavy hand, then they're forced to just, you know, oftentimes just pass back without doing anything. And if you do run out an early creature and the opponent just kills it, that's, you know, kind of a blowout as well. So definitely happy to keep a slower hand in the mirror match, especially post-sideboard. Okay, so it looks like the opponent's disconnected here. Never like to get wins like that. Oh, no, okay. So they got back in just in time. Okay, so they lead on a Symmetry Sage here, which we're definitely going to snap off a Shoverside against. You know, maybe there's an argument to wait until their turn, but then that kind of opens you up to them using Spell Pierce to protect it, and then we don't really have a good way to kill it, right? We'd need to find a wizard to use a Wizard's Lightning, so I think it makes sense to just use it main phase here. Now, it would be a little awkward if they have Dreadhorde Arcanist as a follow-up play here, because we don't have a way to kill it straight away. But, you know, we've got our draw step. We can potentially find both Soulscar Mage and Symmetry Sage. If we find Soulscar Mage, we have to play our land on blue, though, which is a little bit awkward. They do just run the show-off out, though, which I'm kind of surprised about. I thought they would have plotted that, but either way, we can definitely kill that with Play with Fire. And now we don't hold mana open for removal, but I'm going to set stops during the opponent's turn anyway, just to represent both Consider and Spell Pierce here. So just going to jam the iteration here, see what we hit. Okay, interesting. So I think I might get 2 creatures here, because we've already got Flame of an Orb to draw to, and, you know, getting 2 threats here is pretty decent. We've already got the 3rd land, so we don't need to worry about that. Maybe an argument to keeping the land, though, so that we can, you know, go plot plus hold open removal, although I guess we can still do that with 3 lands. So they do shove aside this Symmetry Sage. Thankfully, it's not super impactful if they go Arcanist into Reckless Charge here. But, you know, next turn, I think if they don't do anything here, we're just going to plot the show off. Okay, we do find another land that's pretty big. So, yeah, I think I'm just going to plot the show off here. Oh, no, wait, I can't tap both those. Whoops, my bad. Yeah, we'll just plot the show off, and then we're still holding open shove aside. And then if they do play a creature, we can potentially go show off into Flame of Anor. And unless they've got Spell Pierce, there's nothing they can really do about that, which is pretty huge. So this is why I was kind of surprised that they just jammed the show off out there, because they don't really get, the only advantage of them doing that is they get in for 1 point of extra damage. But, we can kill it straight away. So I definitely think in the mirror match, unless you have a load of mana open to buff the show off, it's almost always better to just plot it. And then, if the opponent does have burn spells, you basically just force them to keep holding mana open every single turn, or they risk just taking an insane amount of damage out of nowhere. Okay, so they draw to a Flame of Anor. See what else they got here. But yeah, these are the kind of spots we love to be in, right? We've got show off in plot ready if we need to use Flame of Anor. We've got Treasure Cruise to put ahead in terms of card advantage. We've got Wizard's Lightning as well as shove aside here as well. Okay, so they play 2 creatures, which I'm actually pretty happy about, because we can shove aside one and then show off into Flame of Anor the other one. There's maybe an argument to waiting on this shove aside here until they go to their attack step, in case they, for example, if their other card in hand was a Reckless Charge and they use one on both. So maybe that was a slight misplay on my part, because now they could potentially Reckless Charge the Balmor, which would be the more appealing of the two to kill. But here I think we're definitely just going to go show off into Flame of Anor, take out the Balmor, draw 2. If they have Spell Pierce, we still have the Wizard's Lightning here as well. Although we do need to be wary if that last card is a land that they could go Gigantha Reckless Charge. Okay, the last card's a Wizard's Lightning, so that's completely fine. Obviously, losing the show off isn't ideal here, but we get to draw 2, which is pretty huge. And then could either plot the show off, cast the show off, or cast the Symmetry Sage here. I think out of all of those, I prefer going for the Symmetry Sage, because we could get punished if they draw like an Arcanist off the top, right? If they go Arcanist into Reckless Charge, we can then Wizard's Lightning to kill it. Okay, so they just go for a Gigantha, which is fine. Okay, no untap land, that's pretty big, so we don't take a hit from the Gigantha this turn. And then since we're going for Treasure Cruise, I could maybe see an argument to going Wizard Lightning face here, but that seems like a bit of a waste when we've already got 7 cards in the yard. The argument to that is that if I draw a Snapcaster Mage, I would quite like to keep one Flame of Anor in the graveyard. So I think I'm actually going to Treasure Cruise and keep Flame of Anor in the graveyard. Doing this means that if we draw Flame of Anor off the top, we still have enough mana to cast it here. So we are paying an extra mana on the Treasure Cruise here, but I think it's worth it just in case we find this Snapcaster Mage. And we do find a Flame of Anor off the top, which is huge. So here, I think I'm going to shock in the Steam Vents, Flame of Anor to take out the Gigantha and draw 2, and then still hold open Wizard's Lightning in case they draw like an Arcanist again, or just any other creature they want to use Reckless Charge on. And then I feel like we should be in a good spot from this point onwards, right? We've got, the main thing we're worried about here is creature into Reckless Charge, and we've got that on lock. And then if we untap, we've got double show off, double Wizard's Lightning, which should, even if they draw just a single removal spell, that should be more than enough to go for lethal. So we'll see what the opponent drew here. They've still got a redraw of the Fiery Islet as well, but I feel like we've got basically all of their good draws on lock at this point. Treasure Cruise coming in clutch to just help us pull ahead. This should hopefully highlight, why we typically have the advantage against the more stock builds that have less tools to grind into longer games, and also can get blown out by Reckless Charge more often. Although, to be honest, if I was playing the Reckless Charge versions, that would absolutely be the first. That would absolutely be the first card that I would cut post sideboard for extra interaction, because it does make you super vulnerable to the opponent's removal. And shove aside is going to be brought in, or there's going to be more removal in from both sides after sideboard as well. So Reckless Charge becomes even worse there. So opponent either in the tank, or disconnected, or, just salty that they're far behind. I don't know. I mean, they should still probably play it out, because there's a chance that we've just drawn multiple lands, right? I've had that happen a few times where you Treasure Cruise and just draw 3 lands, and even though you're ahead on card advantage, you're still behind in terms of the race. But I guess it's 17 life. We're pretty safe here as well. So yeah, opponent might have alt F forward, might have disconnected. By the way, we should just be good to go for lethal here, right? Even if they have like a burn spell here, we should still have more than enough. If they go crack Fiery Islet and they have 2 burn spells here, they might be able to survive maybe, but even then, we're at 17, so we should just be able to win the following turn. Okay, probably going to edit out the opponent Wraithen here. But either way, we can just cast both show-offs and then just go face with both Wizard's Lightning. And, you know, even if they have got a burn spell here, we should have more than enough for lethal. So here we go, face. Buff one of the show-offs with the Symmetry Sage. And that's way more than enough for lethal. So we got there, nice. Okay, so on the play here, and I don't normally like keeping one-landers without consider, but we do have double play with fire here, so we can potentially go Steam Vents, play with fire face to try and scry towards a second land, and then we can obviously either plot or just cast the show off. So this is definitely a risky keep, but I think it's worth it because if we do find second and third land, going plot show off into Flame of Anor is really strong, and then, you know, going face with play with fire obviously isn't ideal if we're up against a creature deck, and we are against a Lurrus deck, so I have to imagine, unless that's blue-black control, that is likely a creature deck, but, you know, if we do end up having to use this play with fire on a creature, we can still upkeep the play with fire, or, you know, missing the second land for a turn isn't the worst thing with this hand either, but... So yeah, this is definitely a risky one, but we are running slightly more lands than the stock versions of Wizards. We're on 22 here, so I think we are more likely to find the second land on curve. But yeah, we'll see what the opponent's on here. Okay, Fairy Seer, so we're probably just forced to use these play with fires as removal spells. But having said that, I do think that, you know, Ninjas is a deck that probably won't punish me as much, especially when we have two play with fires here, for not going face for the scry here. So definitely going to use this play with fire to take out the Fairy Seer. Hopefully they don't also have an Ornithopter. Okay, looks like they're just passing it back. So definitely going to use the play with fire. We just need to keep their creatures off the board to shut off their ninjutsu abilities. We did miss a land, but we can cast the Soulscar Mage, so that's pretty nice. We obviously could have used the upkeeps, you know, setting up keep stop to play with fire and try and scry towards a land. But like I said, I think it's really important to just keep their creatures off the board in the early game. We just don't want to let them use their ninjutsu abilities and start snowballing the game. Okay, sick. So we hit the second land here. So we could obviously go for the show off, but again, I think it's super important to cut them off their ninjutsu abilities. So I'm just going to shock in the Steam Vents here, attack. They almost certainly don't block here, and then we can just either play with fire or Wizard's Lightning here. I think it's interesting. I'm going to go with play with fire, which is the slightly greedier of the two lines, because the risk of going for play with fire here is if they go fatal push into a creature, then Wizard's Lightning isn't live anymore. So on balance, maybe I should have gone for Wizard's Lightning there, because there aren't really any of their creatures that have 3 toughness unless they're running the new Satori, which they could be on. So that was definitely a greedy line from me. Maybe on reflection, I'm supposed to just go for the Wizard's Lightning first there. But I would have regretted that if they did just cast Satori. So Symmetry Sage here is a pretty nice draw. Okay, they have Shield's Edict, so they do take out the Soulscar Mage, but at least we have another wizard in play here, so that Wizard's Lightning is live. But yeah, on balance, I think that was probably a misplay. I am probably supposed to use a Wizard's Lightning there where we have a guaranteed wizard in play. Because play with fire does answer basically everything else in their deck outside of the new Satori, which we don't even know they're running, right? But either way, even though we're missing land drops, I still feel like we're in an okay position here, right? We can kill anything they cast here, like Mooncycle Hacker, we can just take out with Wizard's Lightning straight away. If we hit the third land drop, we can Flame of Anor, take out Retrofitter Foundry, and draw 2. And also, even though we're stuck on 2 lands, there's a chance that we can Treasure Cruise soon as well. Right, we are gradually filling up our graveyard. We also have the Slickshot show-off here as well. Okay, we got Consider, so I think I'm just going to Consider and just try and find the third land. Because if we do find the third land, okay, perfect. And it's a Prismatic Vista, so that fills our graveyard even further. We can then go for show-off and have the third land available for the Flame of Anor as well. Here, I think, since it's pretty obvious the opponent doesn't have a removal spell, I'm just going to cast the show-off here, because if they had a Fatal Push, I'm pretty sure they would have cast it already, so... And we have 2 wizards in play, right? If I only had 1 creature in play, I think there's a good argument to plotting the show-off instead to guarantee Flame of Anor for next turn. But since we have 2 wizards in play, you know, I think just getting in for damage makes more sense, because they would need 2 removal spells for us to get punished here. And it's pretty obvious from how they've been playing that they don't have that. Here I'm just going to go for Flame of Anor because they don't have mana up for Spell Pierce here, so we don't need to worry about that at all. We can buff the Symmetry Sage and the Slickshot show-off, and then hopefully draw into a land here. Because I feel like we should have enough... okay, yeah, opponent activates the Retrofitter Foundry in response. Okay, we do find a land, which is huge, and then I think we should have enough in the graveyard for Treasure Cruise here as well, which is pretty sick. Yeah, we have exactly enough. So now we can delve as well, draw 3, and now we can buff the Slickshot show off with the Symmetry Sage and get in for a ton of damage here. Obviously, they can block here, which I presume they will, because taking 7 is a lot. But yeah, this is we're pulling so far ahead now. You know, we have 2 Flame of Anors now, plus the Symmetry Sage. So even if they take out both creatures and cast Lurrus, we can Flame of Anor take out the Lurrus, which is pretty big. So yeah, I'd be very surprised if we lost this one now, because the way that Ninjas typically wins this is by keeping us off the board, but our build is much better at grinding into longer games. And, you know, I feel like the way that we lose this matchup is if we let them get ninjutsus off in the early game, which we were really good at stopping them because we had those early removal spells. So here, if they pass back, they could have mana open for Spell Pierce, which is obviously a bit of a concern, but, you know, at worst, we still buff our creatures, and then we can, you know, cast a Symmetry Sage as well. Okay, they do have the Fatal Push, so now their shield's down, we can just go for Flame of Anor. Definitely going to take out the Lurrus here. So we get to draw 2, hopefully find another blue land would be ideal. Okay, we only found a red land. So we could obviously use Consider to try and find a blue land, but I feel like that's unnecessarily risky. I'm just going to cast another Symmetry Sage, and then we're set up pretty well for next turn, right? They kind of have to leave this Fairy Seer back. Well, they wouldn't want to attack anyway unless they had a Fatal Push, but yeah, I feel like we're so far ahead at this point, and I don't think Ninjas is particularly good at recovering from behind, right? The way they typically win this matchup is with a bunch of interaction and then using their ninjutsu abilities as a way to get ahead on tempo, but so here we could go for the show off, but I feel like resolving Flame of Anor is way more important here, right? I would much rather play around Spell Pierce here because, like I said, if they can start ninjutsuing, especially if they can start copying the Silver Fur Master, we're in a good spot. So I want to use Flame of Anor here before the opponent has a chance to Spell Pierce it. And what we draw off the Flame of Anor could change what we want to do for the turn as well, obviously. We missed land drops again, so okay, opponent just keeps it up. I was going to go for the iteration there, but I think there's a good argument to just jamming both the Symmetry Sages there. I think it's pretty close. So again, like I said, I think the main way we lose this matchup is if they can kill our creatures to keep them off the board and then get their early ninjutsu abilities off. And I feel like this particular version of the deck that can grind into longer games changes how this matchup plays out. I feel like we're the control deck in this matchup now because we can grind into the longer games much more effectively than they can, I think. So I like just bringing in the extra interaction there because I feel like the only way we lose with this particular variant of Wizards is if they get early ninjutsu abilities off. So having a lot of cheap, cheap interaction is very important. So we had to mull that first one because we just didn't have enough lands. This one is kind of rough that we don't have any early interaction, but we do have Symmetry Sage that we can get down on turn 1 here as just a blocker. So as long as they don't have creature into... Okay, no Ornithopter there is great to see as well. Yeah, as long as they don't have creature into Fatal Push here, we should be good. But obviously they don't have that. I'm going to lead on cracking the Prismatic Vista here just to thin our deck slightly, right? I don't think there's any way we get punished for going for a basic instead of a dual land here. So doing that just slightly increases our odds of finding an instant or sorcery, which is pretty big. If we can find a removal spell here particularly, that would be very nice. Okay, they go for Thousand Face Shadow. And we do find a removal spell. That's pretty huge. So I'm going to just cast the show off here, right? We could obviously go with the play with fire, but they could very well have Spell Pierce. Casting the Slickshot show off and holding it back to as a blocker is really big here because if we plot the show off, they can then Fatal Push the Symmetry Sage, attack and get the ninjutsu ability off, which would obviously be kind of a disaster. So they have the Changing Outcast here, which means they can obviously make a 4/4 at instant speed. I'm going to shock in a land and play with fire the Thousand Face Shadow just to play around Spell Pierce, and then just start getting in for damage in the air. We're basically just racing in this spot. So I'm going to attack here. They could obviously have a Fatal Push or Shieldred's Edict potentially. Okay, doesn't look like they do. I assume they would have cast it already if they did. So now we're basically just racing. Oh, interestingly, they choose not to make a 4/4 there, which is kind of interesting because I don't really feel like there's a way they get punished for that unless we happen to have Reckless Rage, which we're not running in this variant. But I guess the opponent doesn't know that. Maybe they just want to guarantee... Actually, yeah, I guess it makes sense if they have a ninjutsu card in hand, right? Because if they make a 4/4, they don't want to bounce that to ninjutsu. Okay, so they do have the Silver Fur Master. We could obviously flash in the Snapcaster Mage to block, but that's just a complete blowout if they have a Fatal Push. Whereas if we wait a turn, we can go, play a Fiery Eye or the Otawara, and then use Snapcaster Mage to flash back the play with fire to kill the Silver Fur Master, and then trigger both Symmetry Sage and the show off. So That sounds a lot better to me. Oh, and we draw another Play with Fire off the top. That's pretty big, because if they have Spell Pierce for the first Play with Fire we use here, we have a backup, which is really nice. So, going to go for the Snapcaster Mage main phase, flashback the Play with Fire to take out the Silver Fur Master. We could obviously go for the Fairy Seer, but if they do have a removal spell like a Fatal Push here, that doesn't change our clock at all. So again here, we could go take out the Fairy Seer here, but again, I don't believe we have lethal here, so it just makes sense to take out the more threatening of the two creatures here, because even if we take out the Fairy Seer, we're only attacking for 10 here, right? They survive at 3, so it makes more sense to me anyway to take out the Silver Fur Master, because that's the main way they can recover. And yeah, opponent just scoops it up, so we got there, nice. Okay, so we're on the play here. And yeah, this hand looks pretty good to me. Right, we've got Symmetry Sage on 1. And this could actually be a hand where I iteration on 2. I basically never iteration on 2 because obviously you want to get value off both cards, right? You want to get the land as well. But I could very well see this being a hand where I do just jam iteration on 2 to just trigger Symmetry Sage because we've already got a decent turn 3 play in Flame of Lenore. Okay, Commune with Spirit. So we're getting this Enchantress here, which is usually a pretty scary matchup, but we already have the Otawara in hand here. So I assume they're on the Phyrexian Unlife Solemnity lock, and if we can get them to a negative life total, we can then just hopefully use the Otawara to bounce the unlife and just win that way. Now we've drawn Soulscar Mage, I do think I'm going to wait to use the iteration here, especially because we really want to hold this Otawara as an out to the Solemnity unlife lock, right? So playing the Soulscar Mage here does mean that we don't get in for damage with the Symmetry Sage. Oh, 9 lives. Okay, 9 lives is more difficult because we have to bounce the Solemnity and deal 9 individual points of damage in the same turn, which is going to be a lot more tricky. We do thankfully find a third land though, so that means that we can hold on to this Otawara, which is our only real out to the lock. So we know the opponent has the lock here, so, you know, there's no real point well, we'll attack here, but, like, it doesn't really matter. I assume they just jam the 9 lives this turn, right, because we do represent a ton of damage, and they have to shock a land in as well, So this is an interesting turn here, because we definitely want to get 3 counters on this 9 lives. So the 2 ways we have of doing that is either Flame of Lenore to draw, which triggers the Symmetry Sage, or we can go Slickshot, Show Off, and Snapcaster Mage in the same turn, which I think... this is tricky. I think I prefer going Slickshot, Show Off into Snapcaster here, because then we have 5 creatures in play. So if we can find a burn spell off the top, we can hopefully go Otawara, bounce the Solemnity, burn spell, attack with all 5 creatures. Again, there's so much that can go wrong with that, but I think that's our best opportunity to win here. And having said that, I think Enchantress is one of the trickier matchups. I think this is one of the very few matchups where I would actually prefer to be on the older version of Wizards, although having said that, with the draw they had here, I don't think that would really make too much of a difference. Okay, so we're really looking for either Play with Fire or Wizard's Lightning here. Those are the 2 cards that we really want to find. Oh, sick. Okay, Wizard's Lightning, that's huge. So we've just got to pray that they don't have... A Sweeper would just completely wipe us out this game, I think. Or a removal spell, or a Sterling Grove. Those are the cards we really don't want to see. Because if they Sterling Grove, we only have 1 Otawara in the deck. Okay, they go for Enchantress Presence. Really hope they play the Rest in Peace here. Okay, sick. We should win here then, right? We crack the fetch at end of turn. Then we Otawara bounce the Solemnity. Wizard's Lightning face, which puts the 4th counter on the 9 lives. And then attack with 5 creatures, and that should be game, right? So this is a situation where I think 9 lives is actually better against us than Phyrexian Unlife, because with Phyrexian Unlife we can put them at a negative life total and then just bounce the Otawara and we win if they're at a negative life total. So that puts the 5 counts on. Okay, so yeah, this is definitely one of the trickier matchups with this particular build. I think every other matchup, basically the only builds that I think this deck is worst, or this version of the deck is worst against, is decks where you just need to race and apply tempo. And the only decks that really applies to is stuff like Enchantress and also Mono Green Devotion, but I feel like Mono Green Devotion is already a really good matchup for Wizards anyway, so I think this is potentially one of the scariest matchups here. So for that reason, I'm going to cut the Treasure Cruises. I don't think we're playing into longer games here. We really want to just try and race as much as possible. Spell Pierce is obviously really clutch here because we can use it to counter their lock pieces. And then I'm going to bring in the Shover side here just because they're Specifically, Sanctum Weaver is a way they can pull really far ahead, but obviously we want to be able to kill Sithis as well. Okay, so nothing on turn 1's pretty nice. Definitely going to get the Soulscar Mage down here, and then having Spell Pierce plus Snapcaster Mage here is really nice, because now they got Sterling Grove, which is a bit of a concern, because that means that we can no longer use our removal spells to take out Sithis and Sanctum Weaver. Gonna jam Soulscar Mage just so we've got more creatures in play. We've got the Spell Pierce up, and then next time we've got Snapcaster Spell Pierce as well, which is pretty big. Okay, so they go for Enchantress Presence. It's not a lock piece, but that is a way that they can start snowballing the game. So I think I'm going to counter that. If I didn't have Snapcaster Mage, there's a potential that I would hold that instead, because it's more important to especially hit a lock piece like a 9 lives, for example. But with this Snapcaster Mage, I think I'm happy to hold it. Okay, so that is a lock piece. I'm happy to counter that. Again, if they have like a 9 lives or a... Oh, they just scoop it up. Okay, we just applied enough tempo there. So yeah, that's a sometimes tricky matchup, but our hand lined up very well against theirs there. Okay, so we're on the play here, and I can't keep a 1-land, especially when it's just a fetch land. This one we can keep though, and I think pretty happy to put back the Treasure Cruise here, right? Treasure Cruise is a card that's obviously great in a lot of matchups, but it's usually at its worst in your opening hand, right? You want to draw it once you've already started to get a few things in the graveyard, so definitely happy to keep this one though. We've got Symmetry Sage, and Play with Fire is a way to trigger it early, then Snapcaster Mage and Flame of Anor. Going to be a little bit awkward with this Snapcaster Mage and Flame of Anor if we don't find our third land, but we can potentially use this Play with Fire to go face to hopefully scry towards the third land, particularly if we wanted a way to get Symmetry Sage online early. Okay, if we're not going to find a third land, I think Iteration is the next best option, right? Because that's another card that we can cast next turn to buff the Symmetry Sage and give us 3 looks to find the third land as well. Obviously, if you plan it as a counterspell, that's going to be a little bit rough, but even if they do, we still get to buff the Symmetry Sage, and, we've still, got another look at finding the third land on curve anyway. Okay, so opponent's on Dimir and just ships it back. Just going to jam the Iteration, so not 100% sure what we're up against here. Could be Control from the way they're playing. The other blue-black deck is Ninjas, really, but I don't really think... if the opponent's playing Ninjas, they're usually on Lurrus, and they usually play something in the first 2 turns. So here, I have to assume we are against Control, in which case I probably want the Slickshot show off over the Play with Fire. I'm going to set stops here, though, just to try and bluff having something here, right? If we have, like, a Consider or a Burn spell or something, could change the way the opponent plays, potentially. Okay, so they crack your Prismatic Vista, so they could have a removal spell here, maybe. But I imagine it would be Fatal Push, which doesn't need them to crack the fetch. Oh, it's Drowning Lock. Okay, interesting. So, probably against Control then here, if I had to guess. Although I have seen someone playing Rogues recently, although they were also on Lurrus. So yeah, just have to assume that we're up against Control. So here, I'm going to go Soulscar Mage in to plot the show off. We could obviously just pass with the Snapcaster Mage as well, but the best thing we've got in our graveyard currently is Play with Fire. So I like doing this because... it forces the opponent to use their interaction if they have it. The downside of just passing here is that if the opponent has something like a Sauron's Ransom, we just freely allow them to use it, whereas casting the Soulscar Mage kind of forces them to use their mana on removal. Otherwise, if they wait until their turn, they have less mana available for stuff like counterspells. So here, we could obviously cast the show off, but I think, at this point, I would much rather tax the opponent's interaction. Again, if they have something like a Memory Deluge or a Sauron's Ransom, we're not really doing that too effectively, but if they do just have a bunch of interaction and counter spells here, we are kind of forcing the opponent to just, waste their mana this turn completely, which would be really nice. So I think I'm definitely going to save this show off. Okay, they're on Brazen Borrow, so I guess that's why they're not on Lurrus. So I think I'm just going to go for the Snapcaster Mage now, because that is something that we would have to deal with at some point eventually, right? I assume their game plan is to just try and play like a tempo roll, hitting us with the Brazen Borrow every single turn and then countering our other stuff. So here, going for Snapcaster Mage while they only have 1 mana open, we would only get punished by Stern Scolding if they had that. If they have Spell Pierce for the Play with Fire, we still get to get a creature in play, and they obviously didn't have either here, so we get to get the Brazen Borrow off the battlefield. And again, if they tap out to deal with the Snapcaster Mage here, then their shields down, we could go like Show Off into Flame of Anor to draw 2. So yeah, I feel pretty good about this spot, and I definitely feel like this build in particular with the Snapcaster Mages and Treasure Cruisers is so much better against these sorts of control decks that the conventional Reckless Charge builds would really struggle against. So we'll see what the opponent has here. If they don't do anything and they just pass back with mana open, I'm just happy to, you know, attack with the Snapcaster Mage, and then Flame of Anor at their end step. We could also just cast the Show Off because, you know, there's oftentimes against interactive decks, once you've already got a wizard in play, there's not too much risk of playing a second one. But I guess specifically against control, you then open yourself up to being weak to sweepers. So here I'm going to go for the Symmetry Sage and the Show Off. I feel at this point with 3 wizards in play, you know, I would rather just start applying pressure here. Again, if they have a sweeper, then it's not ideal, but we can still go, you know, if they do tap out for a sweeper, we go Flame of Anor end of their turn, and then go Treasure Cruise when they're tapped out as well, which is pretty huge. So, wow, opponent goes for Snapcaster Mage, which is actually really nice for us here, because now we can use both modes of Flame of Anor, and if they use a counter spell to stop this, they don't get to utilize the spell that they get off the Snapcaster Mage. Definitely going to choose to buff the Snapcaster Mage, because if they do use the Drown in the Lock here, I presume they're taking out the Show Off, so I would rather buff the Snapcaster Mage here, because I assume the Show Off is just dying here regardless. And they don't use a counter spell, which makes sense, but yeah, Flame of Anor putting in work there. Really happy for them to cast the Snapcaster Mage. So we do lose the Show Off here, which is a little bit annoying, but we still have 2 creatures in play. And, you know, we've got this Treasure Cruise here as a way to refuel, so presumably they have to deal with our creatures on board at some point. And then hopefully we can find a window to resolve this Treasure Cruise when they don't have counterspell mana open. Or, you know, we have multiple spells so we can try and bait out a counterspell so that the Treasure Cruise can resolve. We still have access to Gigantha. You know, this is the kind of spot where Gigantha can be really useful. We can just put it into our hands and then potentially cast it next turn, you know, force them to have to deal with that, and then resolve the Treasure Cruise, which should hopefully help us pull ahead. So, yeah, I feel pretty good about this spot. We obviously have Fiery Islet as well. Wow, they just tap out for Treasure Cruise of their own. Oh, wow, that's rough for the opponent. I guess they were just trying to find a land here. So here I'm pretty happy to just play with Fireface, because that then gets the 7th card in the graveyard. We can then Treasure Cruise for just 1 mana, and then, you know, we're getting pretty close to lethal here, right? We have a lot of good top decks that can just win us the game, right? We're putting them down to 7 with 6 power in play, so 2 burn spells does it. Oh, Show Off the top does it as well. So obviously a little bit rough the opponent had to tap out there. Well, I guess they didn't necessarily have to tap out. We don't really know what their hand was. I presume they were trying to do it to find a land, and they might have had a Fatal Push in hand potentially, but either way we get to punish the opponent for tapping out pretty hard there. So post-sideboard, I feel like, you know, game 1, our deck is already pretty well set up against control. Post-sideboard, we don't have too much specifically against blue-black. Against blue-white, I sometimes like bringing in Pithing Needle as a way to preemptively stop Teferi and sometimes the Wandering Emperor, but blue-black, I mean, I guess they could be on the 1 ring if they're not running Lurrus, but, you know, we haven't seen that, so I don't want to preemptively bring in Pithing Needle when we haven't seen it at all. And Play with Fire is also decent, right? We saw it there, you know, got us some scry value and helped us close out the game as well. So Play with Fire, whilst it's not the best card in this matchup, because you typically, you know, it's at its best when it can be flexible, be killing creatures as well. Well, I guess they are running Brazen Borrow, so it's not too bad. But yeah, regardless, you know, Spell Pierce is really nice here, and having a couple copies of Play with Fire can be useful to kill random creatures like Brazen Borrower, and also give us a bit of reach as well in turns like that where the opponent's shields are down and we can just force through some extra damage. And sometimes, if the opponent is, you know, overloaded on removal and they can keep some of our creatures off the board, oftentimes we can just win with burn spells like Wizard's Lightning and Play with Fire, just burning them out as well. So, yeah, I feel pretty good about this sort of matchup. Just going to edit out the rest of sideboard and get into game 2. Okay, sweet. Here we go for game 2 then. So, obviously being on the draw is going to be a little bit more awkward, but again, you know, I feel like this particular build can really afford to play around a lot of the conventional play patterns against control, where we can, you know, plot the Show Off and just have it available for whenever we want to tax the opponent's removal, and then we've got Snapcaster Mage that we can play on the opponent's turn. Okay, so they lead on a Thoughtseize. Be interesting to see what they take here. I could see them taking probably Soulskull Mage is the most high impact take, because then that makes our Wizard's Lightning a lot less effective. But I could also see them taking Spell Pierce if they don't take that. You know, if they've got a Fatal Push in hand, I think there's a good chance they take the Spell Pierce there instead. By the way, we can lead on blue, the blue side on pathway here, and then if they cast something we want to counter, we've obviously got Spell Pierce up, and then if not, we can just use Consider here, which is pretty nice. So I think we're mainly looking for 1-mana creatures would be really nice so that we can go creature and Hold Open Spell Pierce, but Iteration, Treasure Cruise, and Flame of the North also all very nice pickups. Okay, Symmetry Sage is a nice one, so now we can go Sage, Hold Open Spell Pierce in case they do have a removal spell here. Again, that could mean, if they have multiple removal spells, that could still lead to a little bit of a blowout, but we've still got this Spell Pierce available here to stop their proactive stuff. We can put Gigantha into hand if we keep drawing lands. We can obviously crack the Fiery Islet if we want to as well. So definitely feel pretty comfortable even in these longer games. Oh, interesting. They're on Spell Stutter. Okay, I didn't expect that one. So they could potentially be running some fairies in the deck. We haven't seen any, but I have seen some builds that run the Sleep Curse Fairy. Oh, they're running Bitter Blossom. Interesting. So I guess that is a way that they can feel the Spell Stutter, but Bitter Blossom seems kind of a risky card to be running against Wizards because it's going to be constantly damaging them. Now, I guess it does produce flying blockers every single turn, which, without Balmor, we don't have any way to trample over that necessarily. So I don't know. It doesn't strike me as the sort of card that would be amazing in the matchup, but I can see the logic, especially if you're reliant on it to, make cards like Spell Stutter better. So opponents either set a stop or they have something for 0 mana here. Oh, they have a Surgical Extraction. Okay, interesting. Oh, I guess that's not a bad play because they know that we have a Wizard's Lightning in hand, and unlike the similar extraction effects like Necromentia or Unmoored Ego, we don't get to draw a card when they extract cards from our hand, but, I'm pretty happy if people bring in Surgical against me. I guess, one other thing to note with this deck that it's running 3 Snapcaster Mage, 3 Treasure Cruise is that we do have a decent number of cards that are reliant on the graveyard, but commonly played graveyard hate in the format, most of the commonly played one is artifact based, which Flame of the North can answer straight away, stuff like Unlicensed Hearse and Soul Guide Lantern. Honestly, Surgical Extraction sucks against Wizards. Like, yeah, you can snipe a card that Snapcaster Mage is trying to flash back, but so much of your deck doesn't care about that at all. You have so many other cards that can still win you the game through that as well. And so, I'm pretty happy if people bring in Surgical against me. The only 2 pieces of Graveyard Hate that that can cause problems are Rest in Peace and Leyline of the Void, but neither of those are particularly commonly played, and even if you are against a blue-white control deck running Rest in Peace, so much of your deck doesn't care about that either, right? Obviously, it's very, very good against your Treasure Cruises, but you can still flash in Snapcaster Mage as a flash threat, which, a 2-1 flash is going to be at its best against control. And then, obviously, the rest of your deck past that doesn't care about it at all either, which is really nice. So, Graveyard Hate hasn't been an issue for me at all so far. So interesting spot here. I think, they're taking a damage every single turn off this Bitter Blossom, so I think I'm just going to jam the show off here and just, attack with both and apply pressure if I can, because once they have 2 tokens in play, they can double block to kill the show off, so I want to take the opportunity to get it in play here. Okay, they have Snapcaster, Spell Stutter, and yeah, I guess, their synergies are coming online here where the Spell Stutter does make us have to pay 3 because they have the Bitter Blossom token in play, so... But either way, we're just taking any opportunity here to apply pressure to the opponent's life total. Because if they do keep taking damage off this Bitter Blossom, once they go down to 3, they're just dead to Wizards Lightning off the top. So we're really trying to just apply pressure here as much as we can. Opponent chooses not to block, which makes sense because now they can double block the show off. They also have that creature land up there, which they can use to mill themselves and enable Treasure Cruise more easily if they top deck that. Yeah, they do leave 2 blockers back here for the show off, which makes sense. Wow, they choose to mill me. I mean, I'm pretty happy about that, because if I top... Oh, I was literally about to say if I top deck Treasure Cruise, that's actually better, because then we can pick, we can choose to leave stuff in here for Snapcaster Mage, which is pretty nice. So I think, especially because we know they're also running Treasure Cruise, they probably should be building themselves, unless there's some other reason. But pretty nice iteration hit here. We get to get Treasure Cruise in hand and get a Symmetry Sage as well. So I'm going to attack here. They're probably going to double block. But, we're bluffing a burn spell, right? If we had to play with Fire or Wizard's Lightning, they'd kind of get blown out there. But I don't mind that because that then clears the way for the Symmetry Sage here. Although maybe it's best not to attack there, because then they're kind of forced to keep both back. But I am also worried about them drawing a removal spell off the top. Had they drawn a removal spell to kill the show-off, then they can start attacking with the... they would then have 3 Bitter Blossom tokens plus the creature land they could potentially raise. So I actually think, on balance, I like trading there because it makes us a little bit less vulnerable to removal. While they mill us again. So again, fueling the Treasure Cruise. I mean, I think we've probably had enough cards in the graveyard anyway with this Prismatic Vista, but this enables us to sculpt our graveyard better for future Snapcaster Mages. Okay, so I'm just checking whether I've got enough basics here. I still do, which is fine. This is the kind of spot in games like this where I'm happy to have a lot of basics in the deck. But either way, we get to Treasure Cruise again here, and, any removal spell off the top just wins us it, right? We can just take out the Bitter Blossom token and then just attack in for lethal with the Symmetry Sage here. And then if we draw like another show-off, we're in a pretty good spot as well. Wow, 2 lands is kind of rough. At least we can consider bin another land. Oh, wow. Okay, that sucks. Obviously in a 22 land deck, that's not too likely to happen very often. I don't think we can afford to attack here, though, because of the creature land, especially now they've got Hive of the... sorry, not Hive of the Eye Tyrant, the Hall of Storm Giants over there. And they are at 2, so Play with Fire off the top wins, Wizard's Lightning off the top wins. If they draw a removal spell here, we're dead, but we have at least one more draw step here. So if they fire up Hall and attack with everything here, we have to block Hall with the Symmetry Sage. We take 4... down to 2, and then if we don't draw something off the top, we're just dead here. Gigantha doesn't save us, so if they attack with just the creature land, then we can afford to keep the Symmetry Sage alive here, which restricts what they can attack with. Okay, so they do attack with the Hall here, and I think from their point of view, it's a pretty safe attack all. They could potentially keep 1 Bitter Blossom token back here, though, because if we go Slickshot show off into removal spell, they'd be dead, but... Okay, Flame of Anor, that gives us a chance. We'd love to see any burn spell here. Okay, Play with Fire, huge. And we also hit a Snapcaster Mage, so that would have got there as well. But yeah, we got there nice. Okay, so we're going second here. And I don't think I can keep a 1-lander with Snapcaster and 2 Flame of Anors, even with a Play with Fire to scry. This is definitely better. And I think it's between putting back the show off and the Wizard's Lightning here. I think it's pretty close. I think Play with Fire is a much more better removal spell early on. But I'm going to put back the Wizard's Lightning here because we already have a removal spell if the opponent does have a cheap creature. And having 2 show-offs can really help close games out quickly against slower decks like Yawgmoth here. So... kind of happy that we kept the second show off here. I mean, obviously we need to try and find more instants and sorceries off this Consider here. But I'll see what else they play, right? We're obviously not going to use Play with Fire on the Young Wolf, but if they play something else, yeah, okay. I'm very happy to use Play with Fire on the Hepatra here. So that then means that we can go show off into Consider, which starts applying a lot of pressure. And in this matchup specifically, I'm happy just jamming the show off. I think you should only really be plotting it against decks that are likely to have interaction, and especially game 1 when the opponent's on like a... well, we see they're on Abzan, so I assume they're either going to be on like a Convoke build with Ropeline Attendant, or they're going to be playing it alongside Samwise. So opponent has Deep Cavern Bat, interesting. I assume that would be a Chord of Calling Tutor target, but I'm kind of surprised that they're on that over Juggernaut Peddler, because Peddler does definitely seem like the better card to me. But either way, we're going to attack him with the show-offs here and then just go for the Symmetry Sage. And then next turn, we can start applying a ton of pressure. Obviously, if they have another Deep Cavern Bat or Juggernaut Peddler, we can be in trouble. But I feel like they can't really afford to run too many of that style of effect in a Yawgmoth deck because they have a lot of pressures on their synergies, right? They need to have a lot of other creatures to make Yawgmoth work. Okay, so interesting they attack with the Cavern Bat. I guess they wouldn't want to be blocking with it, and this just gains them a life regardless. Okay, they just ship it back. So definitely going to lead on the Consider here and see what we find. But this turn could represent a ton of damage, especially if we find like another Consider into a burn spell or something crazy. Okay, another show off. We definitely just want instants or sorceries here. Okay, we don't find one, which is a little bit annoying. But we get to attack in for 9 here, which is a decent amount. Especially when they have that peatland that's going to be dealing them damage as well. And then we could go Shockland into Gigantha, but I think I prefer just going Soulscar Mage here. This is a matchup where the longer the game goes on, the more they're favoured, I think. So we just want to get an extra prowess creature in play. And then any instant or sorcery off the top is just going to force through a ton of damage here. So obviously Yawgmoth would be a little bit rough here, but they're already down to 7. If they don't have another untapped black land, they need to go down to 6 to cast it if they do have the Yawgmoth here. So unless they have like Innkeeper as well, I feel like we're in a pretty good spot here. So they do represent Chord of Calling here if they choose not to attack. So they could Chord for Yawgmoth here. Okay, yikes. We don't find an instant or sorcery, which is a little bit rough. Definitely still going to attack with the show-offs here, though, because that puts them down to 5. If they do Chord here, they go down to 4, which really limits the amount of stuff they can do with Yawgmoth, if that's what they do have. If they just crack the peatland here, then I'll be really happy. Okay, no, they do have the Chord, but they do go down to 4 here, so unless they happen to top deck a Blood Artist or an Innkeeper, they can do, they can start picking apart a decent amount of our board, but they're only at 4 life here, and there's definitely a limit to what they can set up here, if that makes sense. So they can potentially kill both show-offs here by putting a counter on each of them and then proliferating, but with the peatland, that would put them down to 1 and mean that they can't use any more activations. But I guess if they don't find an Innkeeper or something, they're incentivized to go again. Because if they find an Innkeeper here, they just win, right? Same with Blood Artist. Oh, I guess they also have one extra look here. So I think we're not too concerned about taking damage at this point. So we can let the damage through. And this way, if they do find a way to keep getting more Yawgmoth activations, they can't kill the Symmetry Sage as easily here either. Okay, they crack the peatland, so they're just digging towards Innkeeper or Blood Artist here, I guess. If they don't find either of them, I think we're pretty much guaranteed to win, assuming we find an instant or sorcery. I guess if we don't, we're forced to just cast Gigantha, which would be a little bit rough, but... okay, they do get an extra activation to put a counter on the Symmetry Sage here. Just gotta hope. I mean, I feel if they draw an Innkeeper or a Blood Artist here, I guess they can't sack the Deep Cavern back, though, interestingly. So if they do have a Blood Artist, they can't loop the Young Wolves, right? Because they both have a counter on each. If they have... Oh, wait, they do have the Innkeeper, but... They need another creature here. If they don't have another... Well, they just ship it back. So presumably if they had another creature there, they could cast it, gain a life, and then just loop the Young Wolves until they find a Chord of Calling. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what their hand is here, but... The other interesting thing is they have double black here for the Proliferate on Yawgmoth. Oh, wow, okay. That's not, not what we want to see off the iterations here, but I feel like we should be good here, right? Unless they have... Even Fatal Push doesn't do it, right? They can proliferate the Yawgmoth, but they would put the Symmetry Sage down to a 1-1, and we still get in for 1. So this game was won on like the tightest of margins if we do end up winning it, right? Because they can activate Proliferate off the Blooming Marsh and the Treasure Token, which kills both show-offs, but they still take 1 off Symmetry Sage. Wow. That was a close game. So post-sideboard here, we definitely want the Pithing Needles for sure. And then we definitely want the Shoversides as well, especially on the draw. And then I think we're going to cut the Play with Fires. I think when it switches, if this does go to a game 3 and we're back on the play again, I think I actually prefer Play with Fire to Shoverside, because being instant speed is just so much better than sorcery speed. But obviously on the draw here, Shoverside is just better because we're going to prioritize using our burn spells to kill the opponent's creatures. So basically, if it goes to a game 3, I'm going to trim 2 Shoversides, bring back in 2 more Play with Fires because they'll be instant speed. And there's very few creatures that have 3 toughness as opposed to 2. So the difference in damage there is very unlikely to matter. So this hand isn't the fastest. I mean, it's still not too bad though, right? We can plot the show off on turn 2. Drawing Flame of Anor here is especially good as well, because we can go plot Flame of Anor, plot Slickshot show off, and then guarantee a wizard in play for Flame of Anor. Slow start from the opponent makes me think they probably are holding on to a Fatal Push as well. So this is the kind of spot where plotting the Slickshot show off is huge. Because even if they go, land into 2-drop, hold up Fatal Push, we can still go show off Flame of Anor with both modes. So, oh wait, hold on, that was maybe a misplay. I probably should have led on the iteration there. But I just slammed the land a little too quickly. Yeah, that was my bad. Because there's no real advantage to playing the 3rd land here, right? We don't have anything in the graveyard yet that we can use with the Snapcaster Mage, so... yeah, that was a wasted turn for me. I should have used the iteration there. That was my bad. I still feel we're in a good spot. Opponent has a very slow start, so I assume they're just holding on to multiple Fatal Pushes here. So here we're going to get another iteration in hand. I feel like we already have enough interaction. We don't need the Side. And again, I'm happy to just play this slowly, right? They don't win particularly quickly. We have removal spell up in case they do try and combo off, but they have basically no resources in play. Oh, Cauldron Familiar. Interesting. So it looks like they are on the Samwise variant, if I had to guess. Even though Cauldron Familiar, not the most impactful card to kill, I think I'm still going to go for it here, because if they have Call of Calling and they want to go for a 2-drop, they're forced to do it now. And without the Cauldron Familiar in play, it limits their ability to combo off as well. So again, opponent's playing slow, so I'm pretty happy to play it slow here as well. So again, I think they do just have Fatal Pushes in hand, so I'm kind of tempted to put Symmetry Sage in hand and put Iteration in the Exile Zone. And again, just tax their removal. Because, if they have Chord of Calling, they can only get a 1-drop here. Okay, we definitely want to go for a land on the Exile Zone. I think we'll just go for a Side here and just go for a Spybluff Canal in play. Again, just going to slow roll it here. No pressure to put creatures in play into what is almost assuredly a Fatal Push from the other side there. And then I think I'm going to pitch a land, which might be a little greedy here, but I feel like the opponent's probably forced to play a creature pretty soon. And if they do, we can start using our Flame of Anors. We have gone shields down, so if the opponent has a Bart here, we could be in real trouble, but... or I guess a land into Woe Strider, they could just win on the spot. Okay, it doesn't look like they have that, thankfully. So that was maybe a little risky of me to do, but now we can go show off into Flame of Anor. And I'm going to go for show off first just because we don't know what we're going to be drawing here, right? We really want to make sure we keep holding open interaction here. I assume they'll must have a Fatal Push from how they've been playing. So I assume they kill the show off here, yeah. So show off dies in response, but we get to take out the Samwise, which is a big deal. That cuts them off that part of their combo at least. And then Pithing Needle, Yawgmoth is probably the more threatening card of the two, because we can keep them off the Samwise combo fairly easily with all of our removal. But in a spot like this where they have 2 Cauldron Familiars already, I think I'm pretty happy using this Needle on Cauldron Familiar. Just because, in these sorts of builds, I mean, I assume because they're running Young Wolf, they are running Yawgmoth in fairly high numbers, but with 2 Familiars in play, I think it's just much better to use the Needle on Familiar here. Oh, wow, they got Shieldred. Okay, so I think I'm just going to go Snapcaster, Flame of Anor, Draw Step, and I think I'm going to choose not to draw 2 here. I think I'm going to take out the food token, which might seem kind of crazy, but I feel like taking 4 off the Shieldred is just unnecessary here. We have so much potential card advantage here. We're already pretty far ahead in terms of resources as well. So I think taking 4 unnecessarily when they've got this pair of Cauldron Familiars here already is a little risky and doesn't really need to happen, if that makes sense. I feel like we're already so far ahead on terms of card advantage that we don't need to risk doing that, if that makes sense. So we draw Treasure Cruise. Hopefully this can find us another land here. Oh, wow. Don't find a land. That's a little bit rough, but I still feel like we should be good, right? The main thing we're worried about here is them assembling the Samwise combo out of nowhere, because the Yawgmoth combo is a lot more mana intensive for them to set up. And again, we're way ahead on terms of card advantage. Our life total is another concern for us. So I'm happy to just trade a Snapcaster Mage with a Cauldron Familiar here. Definitely think I'm going to get this second Needle down naming Yawgmoth, and then that's a potential top deck that could help, get them back into the game in terms of card advantage. And then just going to play a Soulscar Mage and ship it back here. We've obviously got Flame of Anor available, we've got Shoversides available, so I feel pretty confident about this game now. I don't think there's anything they could really find here to get them back into it, unless they chord for a Haywire Might to answer the Pithing Needle and then get the combo, but they've only got one card left in hand at this point. They can't even activate the Cauldron Familiars anymore, so yeah, I'd be very surprised if we lost this one now. And I think since we're so far ahead on terms of card advantage, we can just use the Shoverside. I mean, I guess that does limit the amount of prowess triggers that we can get next turn, but again, I think it's better to just be mana efficient, especially when we have stuff like Snapcaster Mage. So we can cast the Slickshot Show Off here, and then we could potentially use Snapcaster Mage or just use the Flame of Anor in hand to draw 2, and obviously we can kill the food token as well. I think I prefer using the Snapcaster Mage here, because we can Snapcaster Mage, get Flashback Treasure Cruise, draw 3, and then still hold this Flame of Anor in case they have like a second Shieldred, for example. Well, I guess, we could just do it the other way around, where we Flame of Anor now to draw 2 and then save Snapcaster Mage for the Shieldred. But this way we get an extra creature in play to help us close the game out a little bit faster. So, but yeah, either way, we should just be so far ahead here, right? We've got mana available to just be able to answer whatever they cast in terms of creatures. We can start applying pressure with the Slickshot Show Off from the Soulscar Mage as well. Okay, nice. And here it is a little risky to tap out because, well, it's not really. I mean, in general, it would be against this deck, but with 2 Pithing Needles down, we basically shut off both of their main synergies, right? They could Chord of Calling for a Haywire Might here if it was the last card in their hand, but they would, even if they drew Samwise off the top, they would then also need a Sacrifice outlet. So unless they have Witch's Vengeance, we still have ways to recover from that either way. But yeah, we got there nice. That matchup still feels pretty good to me.